November 6, 1943. 28,000 feet above the Dutch-German border. The air was so cold it felt like broken glass in the lungs. Lieutenant Robert Ammann checked his oxygen flow. The gauge read normal, but nothing felt normal up here. Through the plexiglass of his P-38 Lightning, he could see the white trails of 191 B-17 flying fortresses stretched across the European sky like a slow-moving armada of death. His job was simple in theory. Keep them alive. Keep the Luftwaffe away. The Lightning responded to his touch like a living thing. Twin Allison engines humming on either side of him, the distinctive twin-boom design cutting through air so thin it barely qualified as atmosphere. He glanced at his fuel gauges. They were already dropping faster than predicted. The cold was doing something to the engines, something the engineers back in Burbank hadn't fully understood. Behind him, the rest of the 55th Fighter Group struggled to maintain formation. Some of the newer pilots were already reporting problems. Frozen turbochargers, oil congealing to sludge, cockpits so frigid that fingers went numb on the control sticks. Then the radio crackled. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. Ammann's heart kicked against his ribs. He squinted into the glare of the sun. At first, nothing. Then he saw them. Black dots against the white clouds, diving fast. Messerschmitt Df-109s. The Germans had been waiting. They always waited until the formation was deepest into German airspace, furthest from home, most vulnerable. Ammann reached for his throttles, preparing to push them forward, to climb, to intercept. But the procedure wasn't simple. Not in a P-38, it was never simple. If you enjoyed my stories, please subscribe. Consider it your little Christmas gift to me. I'd really appreciate your support. He had to switch tanks. He had to adjust the turbocharger settings on both engines independently. He had to change propeller pitch. He had to disengage the intercooler bypass. He had to do all of this while watching the Messerschmitts close the distance at 300 miles per hour. His hands moved across the cockpit like a pianist playing a concerto in a burning concert hall. Fuel selector, left turbo, right turbo, mixture controls. The seconds stretched. The German fighters grew larger. By the time Lieutenant Ammann had his Lightning configured for combat, two of his squadron mates were already falling from the sky, trailing black smoke. The Luftwaffe pilots didn't hesitate. They didn't struggle with switches. They pointed their noses down and fired. This is the story of two American fighters. One was loved. One was feared. One changed the war. The other almost lost it. And the difference between them wasn't just speed or firepower. It was something far more fundamental. It was the difference between a weapon designed by engineers and a weapon designed by war itself. To understand why the P-51 Mustang became the terror of the Luftwaffe, while the P-38 Lightning became a punchline in German ready rooms, you have to go back to 1940. Back to a moment when Britain was losing, when the Luftwaffe owned the skies, when American aircraft designers were being asked to build something that shouldn't exist. A fighter with the range of a bomber and the performance of a knife. The British came to North American aviation with a simple request. Build us P-40 Warhawks. We need them. We need them now. James Kindleberger, the president of North American, looked at the blueprints for the P-40 and saw a dead end. The Curtiss P-40 was already obsolete. Its Allison engine choked at high altitude. Its performance was mediocre. Building more of them wouldn't win the war. It would just prolong the dying. Kindleberger made an audacious counteroffer. Give us 117 days, he said. We'll design you something better. The British thought he was insane. No one designed a fighter from scratch in 117 days. But Britain was desperate. They said yes. North American's chief designer, Edgar Schmude, went to work. He had been born in Germany, fled to Brazil, then emigrated to America. He understood European thinking. He understood that the future of air combat wasn't going to be fought at 15,000 feet. It was going to be fought at 30,000 feet, where the air was thin and the cold could kill you as easily as a cannon shell. Schmude designed the Mustang around a single revolutionary concept: laminar flow wings. These weren't the thick, stubby wings of early fighters. These were thin, elegant, mathematically perfect airfoils that sliced through high-altitude air with minimal drag. The wing was so efficient it was almost theoretical. The prototype flew for the first time on October 26, 1940, 102 days after the contract was signed. Not 117, 102. The British were stunned, but there was a problem. The P-51, as it was designated, was powered by an Allison V1710 engine. The same engine that was choking the P-40 to death. At low altitude, the Mustang was magnificent. It could hit 390 miles per hour in level flight. It could turn. It could climb. But above 15,000 feet, the Allison lost power. The supercharger couldn't compress enough thin air to keep the engine breathing. The Mustang became sluggish, vulnerable, ordinary. The Royal Air Force used it anyway. They assigned it to low-altitude reconnaissance and ground attack. The pilots loved the handling. They hated the ceiling. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, another American fighter was entering service with very different expectations. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning had been designed in 1937 by a young engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson. Johnson was a genius. He would go on to design the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird. But in 1937, he was just a kid with a slide rule and an impossible assignment. The Army Air Corps wanted a high-altitude interceptor that could climb to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes. They wanted it to go 400 miles per hour. They wanted twin engines for reliability and range. They wanted it yesterday. Johnson gave them the Lightning. It was unlike anything that had ever flown. Twin booms, twin engines, a central nacelle housing the pilot and all the weapons, 4 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all firing straight ahead through the propeller arc. No synchronization gear needed. Just pure, concentrated firepower. When the prototype flew in 1939, it was the fastest military aircraft in the world. It could hit 413 miles per hour in level flight. It could climb like an elevator. It was beautiful in the way a shark is beautiful. Purpose made visible. The Army loved it. Production orders flooded in. By December 7, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the Army Air Forces had 69 P-38s in service. They held them back, kept them in the United States for homeland defense. The Lightning was too valuable, too advanced, too important to risk in combat until the pilots were ready, until the tactics were proven, until everything was perfect. That caution would prove to be a catastrophic mistake. The first P-38s to see combat flew from Iceland. In August 1942, Lieutenant Elza Shahan and Lieutenant Joseph Schaefer intercepted a Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor patrol bomber over the Atlantic. Shahan, flying his P-38F, tore the Condor apart with concentrated nose gunfire. It was the first Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed by the United States Army Air Forces. The engagement lasted seconds. The Germans never saw what hit them. It looked promising. It looked like the beginning of American air superiority. But Iceland wasn't Europe. Iceland wasn't North Africa. In November 1942, the first P-38 groups deployed to Algeria as part of Operation Torch. The 1st, 14th, and 82nd Fighter Groups flew their Lightnings across the Bay of Biscay, skirting neutral Spain, refueling in Morocco. They arrived confident. They had the fastest fighter in the theater. They had overwhelming firepower. They had training. They had everything except one thing. They had no idea what they were about to face. November 20th, 1942. Tafaroui Airfield in Algeria. The P-38s were parked in neat rows, engines still warm from the ferry flight. The pilots were in a briefing tent, studying maps of Tunisia, when the first Messerschmitt Bf-109s came in low and fast. The German pilots had been watching the Americans arrive. They knew where the Lightnings would be parked. They knew. The Americans hadn't set up proper dispersal yet. They knew this was a gift. 2 P-38s exploded in the first pass. The rest scattered like startled birds. Some pilots tried to run to their aircraft. Others dove into slit trenches. The Messerschmitts made 3 passes before disappearing back toward the east. 2 Lightnings destroyed on the ground. 0 American kills. Welcome to the war. The next night, November 21st. 6 P-38s tried to land at an advance base after dark. None of them made it. The field wasn't properly marked. The approach lights were inadequate. 1 Lightning hit the ground short of the runway. The next 4 followed him down like dominoes. The 6th pilot diverted and ran out of fuel trying to find another field. 6 more Lightnings gone. Still 0 enemy aircraft destroyed. The first week of operations was a bloodbath without the blood. The machines were dying faster than the men. On November 22nd, the Lightnings finally got their chance. Lieutenant Mark Shipman of the 14th Fighter Group intercepted an Italian twin-engine transport. He lined up the shot. He pressed the trigger. The nose guns roared. The transport disintegrated. First P-38 kill in North Africa. Shipman would go on to score 2 more. A Messerschmitt Bf-109. A massive Me-323 Gigant transport. But Shipman's success was an outlier. Most of the early encounters went badly. November 28th, 1942. Jagdgeschwader 53, a veteran Luftwaffe unit, intercepted a P-38 patrol near Tunis. The German pilots were flying Bf-109's older models, supposedly inferior to the Lightning's raw performance. The engagement lasted 8 minutes. When it was over, 7 P-38s were falling toward the Tunisian desert. The German pilots claimed all 7. Their losses? 0. Not a single Messerschmitt scratched. The Americans staggered back to base in shock. How? How had the Lightning, the airplane that was supposed to dominate the European sky, just been shredded by fighters that were on paper slower and less powerful? The answer was buried in the details, in the training, in the tactics, in the cold mathematics of aerial combat that no amount of engineering brilliance could overcome. The P-38 pilots had been taught to fight like it was 1918. Turn and burn. Dogfight. The Germans had learned a different lesson. Energy is everything. The Bf-109 pilots didn't turn with the Lightnings. They didn't need to. They dove from above, fired a burst, and then extended away in a shallow dive that the P-38 couldn't follow. And there was the Lightning's fatal flaw. Compressibility. At high speed in a dive, the P-38's controls locked up. The center of pressure on the wings shifted backward toward the tail. The elevator became useless. The pilot pulled back on the control column and nothing happened. The airplane continued to dive faster and faster, the airframe shaking, the controls frozen. Some pilots managed to recover at the last second, pulling out just above the ground with the airframe groaning and rivets popping. Others didn't. They hit the desert at 500 miles per hour and turned into expanding clouds of aluminum and fire. Major Signa Gilk had encountered this problem during testing in 1941. He dove a Lightning from 30,000 feet. At 320 miles per hour indicated airspeed. The tail began to shake violently. The nose dropped until the dive was nearly vertical. Gilk fought the controls. The stick felt like it was welded in place. He survived by cutting the throttles and deploying flaps, anything to increase drag and slow the aircraft. His report went up the chain of command. Lockheed knew about the compressibility problem before the Lightning ever saw combat. But solving it wasn't simple. The physics were unforgiving. At high speed, localized airflow over the wing accelerated past the speed of sound, creating shock waves that disrupted lift and control. The P-38 was flying into a regime of aerodynamics that no one fully understood. The Germans understood one thing, though. If you dove on a Lightning and the pilot tried to follow, he'd either lose control or have to break off the pursuit. Either way, you won. The Luftwaffe pilots started calling the early engagements Lightning hunting. It was that easy. General Adolf Galland, commander of the Luftwaffe fighter forces, was unimpressed. The P-38 had similar shortcomings in combat to our Bf-110, he said, referring to the German twin-engine Zersterer heavy fighters that had been mauled by RAF Spitfires. Our fighters were clearly superior to it. Kurt Buligan, a German ace with 112 kills, remembered the early encounters with something close to nostalgia. The P-38 and the B-24 were easy to burn, he said. Once in Africa, we were 6 and met 8 P-38s and shot down 7. One sees a great distance in Africa, and our observers and flat people called in sightings. We could get altitude first. The P-38s were low and slow. But not all German pilots dismissed the Lightning. Some recognized its potential when flown correctly. Franz Stigler, an ace with 28 kills, offered grudging respect. The Lightning could turn inside us with ease, and they could go from level flight to climb almost instantaneously. We lost quite a few pilots who tried to make an attack and then pull up. One cardinal rule we never forgot was to avoid fighting the P-38 head-on. That was suicide. The concentrated nose armament of the P-38 was devastating in a frontal pass. 4 50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon firing on a single convergent point. If the Lightning pilot got his nose pointed at you, you died. But Stigler also noted the weakness. The best defense was to flick roll the Bf-109 and dive. The Lightning was slow in the first 10 degrees of roll, and it was not as fast in a dive. If the pilot tried to follow, he would lose control, or we would simply extend away. The split opinion among Luftwaffe pilots revealed the central truth about the P-38. It was an airplane of contradictions. In the right hands, flown with the right tactics, at the right altitude, it was lethal. In the wrong circumstances, it was a death trap, and the circumstances in Europe were almost always wrong. The problem wasn't just aerodynamics, it was physiological. The P-38's cockpit heating was catastrophically inadequate. In the thin, frigid air above 25,000 feet, temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The only source of heat was warm air ducted from the engines. It wasn't enough. Pilots flew 4-hour missions in conditions that would have killed a man on the ground in 30 minutes. Their hands went numb, their feet turned to blocks of ice. Frost formed on the inside of the canopy. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Rau, commander of the 20th Fighter Group, filed a report in early 1944. He was reluctant to write it. It felt like betrayal, but the losses were mounting. After flying the P-38 for a little over 100 hours on combat missions, Rau wrote, "It is my belief that the airplane, as it stands now, is too complicated for the average pilot. In the ETO, where we operate at high altitude in extremely cold weather, it is absolutely essential that everything function perfectly. It doesn't." Rau detailed the problems. Pilots arriving in England with minimal twin-engine experience. Inadequate training on the Lightning's complex fuel and engine. Management systems. Turbochargers that froze in the overboost position, causing catastrophic engine failure. Intercoolers that ruptured under high power settings. electrical systems that failed when the generator went offline, and always, always the cold. Pilots were so weakened by conditions that they had to be assisted out of the cockpit upon return, Rao wrote. Their hands and feet became numb with cold, and in some instances frostbitten. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, North American aviation was solving a very different problem. The P-51 Mustang had the airframe. It had the range. It had the handling. What it didn't have was altitude performance. In early 1942, a British test pilot named Ronald Harker flew a Mustang and immediately recognized its potential. But he also recognized its flaw. The Allison engine was strangling the airplane at high altitude. Harker worked for Rolls-Royce. He had an idea. What if you took the Mustang's superb airframe and married it to the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61? Engine? The Merlin was powering the Spitfire Mark IX. It had a two-stage, two-speed supercharger that maintained power all the way to 30,000 feet. The Merlin was already being produced under license in the United States by Packard Motor Company. North American Aviation ran the calculations. The math was almost too good to believe. The Merlin-powered Mustang would have a top speed of 440 miles per hour at 28,000 feet. It would maintain full power at altitudes where the Allison-powered P-51 was gasping. It would have a combat radius with drop tanks of over 800 miles. It would be able to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. No fighter in the world could do that. The first P-51B Mustangs with Packard Merlin engines began rolling off the production line in summer 1943. By December, they were arriving in England. The pilots who transitioned from P-38s to P-51s noticed the difference immediately. The Mustang was simple. One engine, one throttle, one mixture control. You pushed the throttle forward and the airplane went fast. You pulled it back and it slowed down. There were no turbocharger controls, no complex fuel management, no electrical systems that required constant monitoring. The cockpit was warm. The engine in front of the pilot acted as a radiant heater. Even at 30,000 feet, even with outside temperatures at 50 below, the cockpit stayed livable. The Mustang's bubble canopy provided visibility that the P-38's framed canopy couldn't match. A pilot could see behind, above, below. There were no blind spots, no twin booms blocking the rear view, and the Mustang was fast. Not just fast in level flight, fast everywhere, in a climb, in a turn, in a dive. The Merlin engine supercharger maintained power at all altitudes. The laminar flow wing cut through the air with minimal drag. The result was an aircraft that could out-accelerate, out-climb, and out-dive anything the Luftwaffe could field. On December 1st, 1943, the first P-51Bs flew their inaugural combat mission with the 8th Air Force in England. They escorted bombers to Zolling in Germany. The Luftwaffe intercepted Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf F-190s came up to challenge the new fighter. The German pilots had faced P-38s. They had faced P-47 Thunderbolts. They thought they knew what to expect. They were wrong. The Mustangs tore through the Luftwaffe formation like chainsaws through kindling. The P-51's 650 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, fired with a rate and volume that overwhelmed German defensive tactics. The Merlin engine's power allowed the Mustang to climb with the Bf-109 and turn with the FW-190. The dive performance was stable, no compressibility, no control lockup, just smooth, predictable acceleration. The mission was a success. The bombers reached their target. The Mustangs returned with claims of multiple enemy aircraft destroyed. 0 P-51s lost. Just one click to subscribe means a lot to me. Even as a small Christmas gift, your subscription truly helps. The Luftwaffe pilots filed their after-action reports. The language was different from the reports about P-38s. There was no mockery, no dismissiveness. Just cold recognition that the balance of power had shifted. "This new aircraft is very fast at all altitudes," one German pilot wrote. "It can turn and climb with our best fighters. If the pilot is skilled, it is nearly impossible to escape." Over the next 6 months, that assessment would be proven again and again. The P-51 Mustang didn't just escort bombers. It hunted. Major General James Doolittle, the new commander of the 8th Air Force, changed the rules of engagement in January 1944. Mustangs were no longer required to stay close to the bomber formations. They were unleashed. Free to roam. Free to pursue. Free to attack the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found. The results were catastrophic for Germany. P-51s strafed airfields. They intercepted German fighters before they could reach the bombers. They pursued damaged enemy aircraft all the way back to their bases and destroyed them on landing approach. The Luftwaffe's twin-engine heavy fighters, the Bf-110 and the Mi-410, were massacred. These aircraft had been designed to attack. Bombers with heavy cannons and rockets. They were slow, unmaneuverable. In the presence of P-51s, they were flying coffins. The single-engine FW-190, when loaded with the heavy cannon and armor needed to fight bombers, lost its performance edge. The Mustang could simply outfly it. The Bf-109 remained competitive at high altitude, but only barely. The 109 had been designed in the mid-1930s. By 1944, it was being asked to do things its airframe was never intended to do. Adding heavier weapons meant adding weight. Adding weight meant losing performance. The Mustang, with its lighter armament specifically tuned for fighter-versus-fighter combat, could dance around the overburdened MESSERSC-MITTS. By spring of 1945, the war was ending. The statistics told a story that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. P-51 Mustang pilots claimed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air, another 1,000 on the ground. The top-scoring P-51 unit, the 354th Fighter Group, recorded 664 air-to-air victories. Meanwhile, the P-38 Lightning found redemption in the Pacific. There, where combat occurred below 20,000 feet, where the cold wasn't lethal, where the twin engines provided safety over endless ocean, the Lightning became what it was always meant to be. America's highest-scoring ace, Major Richard Bong, shot down all 40 of his victories flying the P-38 over New Guinea and the Philippines. In the Pacific, Lightning pilots downed more Japanese aircraft than any other American fighter type. Difference between the two aircraft was never about engineering alone. It was about matching the weapon to the war. The P-38 was brilliant. The P-51 was necessary. One required mastery. The other required only courage. In the freezing altitudes over Germany, simplicity won. The Luftwaffe had laughed at the early P-38s because they were right to. But they feared the P-51s because they had no choice. That fear, more than any statistic, more than any kill ratio, changed the course of the war. When the enemy stops fighting and starts running, the battle is already over. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, even just as a Christmas gift. It may be a small thing, but it makes a big difference.